Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. And today, man, we have a ton of new stuff to go over. Today was the Year 8 Season 1 PTS livestream, meaning we were joined by Leo, the game's comm dev, and Yannick, our creative director, to walk through the new public test server for the next season of the game. And among many other things, the fact we are getting prototype gear, which is essentially classified gear 2.0 from the Division 1. We're getting Escalations, an all-new endgame mode to finally give veteran players some challenge. I'm really excited for all of this. I have over 3 pages of notes, so we're going to get into it all. They did confirm that the PTS preload and patch notes for this are coming out tomorrow, so stay tuned for those. And then the PTS itself will begin on Friday. I'm going to have lots of videos coming out this weekend to talk about all of it. So if you don't want to miss out and you want to stay looped in for all things Division 2 moving forward, then be sure to subscribe. But let's get straight into the recap. So they began by doing a quick live play of Realism Mode, which is the current content and feature that is in game right now for the anniversary update. They just wanted to quickly cover this and answer a few questions that people had. They said that their intention with adding this mode was to try something new. They weren't sure how it was going to be received since it is so different from the core Division experience, but they've been pleased with the reception. The question, of course, comes up, why is this a limited time feature? Well, they said they wanted to celebrate the anniversary, make it a special occasion for players to jump in, but they also said that this current version of Realism Mode has no replayability. Once you're done, there's not much reason to go back in, and so more than anything, they wanted to test its popularity first before considering doing more with it in the future. As they played and went through, they just talked about the different elements of the mode, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with by this point. But then towards the end, they talked about the development timeline of it all, speaking on how this is one of the first times that they've ever done back-to-back major updates, because we have this, and then in just a few weeks, we're launching straight into Year 8 Season 1. And that is probably a good segue to start talking about that next update, which again, we get to test this weekend on the PTS. This season, called Rise Up, is entirely focused on endgame and hardcore challenges. They're going to be deep diving on RPG mechanics. The narrative pitch is that the Black Tusk are launching multiple assaults on DC, and it is our job to figure out why and rise up to the challenge. So the first feature that they really dove into was the seasonal modifiers. This time around, it's going to be called Recombinant, and as part of this, we gain 3 different modules, as they're called, for offense, defense, and utility, and depending on how many stacks you have in each module, that grants you stats based on the category that you're talking about. So offense gets weapon handling, defense gets armor, etc. Where this gets interesting, and they talked about how customizable this season's modifiers are, your passive modifiers then allow you to add, split, reverse, and do other crazy mathematical effects to your stack values to change what your modules look like. So for instance, you could really buff up your offense, but then slot in one that splits that between the other 2. You could greatly buff your utility stacks, but then slot in one that takes away the ability for you to benefit from the stat of it, but that then buffs the other 2 in very interesting ways. There's a lot of crazy effects to do here, and one very important thing is that the order of your passive modifiers matter. So if you've ever played Balatro, this is actually quite similar to that in the way that you lay out your jokers, because you could have 3 very powerful passive modifiers slotted in, but if they are in the wrong order and not properly utilized, then you're just going to miss out on that added bonus. They also then talked about how they have wild card passive modifiers, which add even more dramatic stack manipulation. So it's pretty crazy. Then for our active modifiers, these 3 offer you different curated abilities, much like we had in Year 7 Season 2 with the likes of Zealot and Sanitation. So leveling these active modifiers up increases the power of each respective ability. It also offers you permanent stack buffs in those 3 different modules. Again, offense, defense, and utility. And then the hostile modifiers for this season will impact the effectiveness or sometimes completely disable your passive modifiers, so you really have to play around those. And then in relation to the modifiers, one pretty cool change that they showed off for this season is that now instead of you earning passive modifiers directly from the seasonal journey, by participating in season content like the journey, maybe other stuff, you earn a new currency of which you can take to this vendor within the White House and buy whichever passive modifiers you want in any order. I think that just gives more choice and freedom to the player, which is always good, so I think this is a cool change. Alright, moving on, they then talked about another new major feature coming this season, which has to do with Black Tusk Retaliations. So, the Black Tusk have been permanently added to the Retaliation rotation. Even though that is a thematic focus this season, this is not a temporary Anniversary Edition, they will always now be a part of this. And while you can build up their agitation meter by playing Black Tusk content, you will also passively earn some amount of agitation by defeating other factions content, since the Black Tusk is a bit rarer in the game and they're not as integrated into the open world. So again, them being in Retaliation is now permanent, but one feature that is going to be exclusive to this coming Year 8 Season 1 is that as you play through Black Tusk Retaliations, you have a chance to either just get the normal kill squad that we're used to, or an elite kill squad called BTSU Team 9. They did not show these off in gameplay, but these enemies are going to be stronger and tougher. We apparently will have the opportunity to get their outfits awarded throughout the season pass, so that's pretty cool. And from this new elite kill squad specifically, we apparently will now have a very slim chance to get exotic blueprints for some of the pretty rare items in the game. Yes, this includes the raid exotics, the climax exotics. You will have a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless, to get the blueprint for those items from this mode and from this specific elite kill squad. The devs did acknowledge how they know that this devalues playing the raid or the incursion or whatever, and they are investigating bringing new rewards and exclusivity to raids and incursions to compensate, but no definitive plans for now. They then talked about a few other quality of life implementations that are coming because of this. For one, they confirmed that Black Tusk can now occupy control points out in the open world. That will happen as a consequence of you failing a Black Tusk retaliation, much like it happens with the other factions now, but they confirmed that this will not happen dynamically, right? You won't see Black Tusk going and taking control points on their own, but it is now a thing that you can potentially see. A couple of key quality of life improvements for Retaliations is that Retaliation Overclock is now a thing. If you notice the agitation meter having multiple rings and a number in the middle, that means how many retaliations you have built up with that specific faction. So the bar no longer stops at 100%, you can build it up to 200, 300%, and that means that you now have the choice to play Retaliations back to back. You don't have to do one, back out, queue up in another one. You can just hit them all in a row. They also confirmed that the 6-hour timer that normally begins as soon as you max out the agitation meter, that now only counts when you are logged into the game and playing. It is not a real world timer. It's 6 hours of you playing the game for you to go and do that before it would fail. And then finally, this was confirmed previously, but it is great to see that Retaliations now have a matchmaking option. If you just want to go and play with a group, you can do it. Okay, well, if you thought that was good, we're just getting started. Now let's talk about Escalation, which is the new endgame mode and difficulty layer coming to the game. So, as they described it, Escalations are a new layer of difficulty and challenge being added to the Division 2's main missions. Again, this is not a season exclusive feature. This is a new permanent addition to the game. When you log into Year 8 Season 1, you will find a new Escalation station within the base of operations right next to where the countdown vendor currently is. And this will display to you a rotation of missions. They didn't confirm if it is on a weekly rotation or just a certain number of days, but you will see a list of missions here that can include both base game and DLC missions. Really glad to see the DLC content being utilized here. And what Escalations offer for the missions in the rotation is you can now set the tier of the mission well beyond heroic. So tier 0 escalation is equivalent to current day heroic, right? But then that goes all the way up to tier 10, and each tier you go up will increase the enemy damage, health, and armor, and then depending on how high you set the tier, new mutators will activate and make the content harder. Mutators can include specific modifiers given to enemies, much like hostile modifiers from the seasons that we're used to, or it can be what's known as a global mutator, which just changes the condition of the mission overall. But yeah, between enemy scaling and these new mutators, the idea is that Escalation will finally offer veteran players a true challenge in the endgame. If you go all the way up to the highest tier, this is not going to be a walk in the park. The other big concept to understand with these is that there is a new token system in order to play through escalation missions. So you gain up some escalation tokens, I believe by playing through tier 0, which again is current day heroic, so it's no added challenge. But you play a bit of that, you get some tokens, you then get to decide how many tokens you want to invest in your run. It costs a certain amount to get to a certain tier, and it will then show you at the bottom that if you complete the mission, you will gain a certain amount of tokens back more than you put in, or if you die, which does equal an instant fail, there are no respawns, you then lose all of those tokens that you wagered. So this is very much meant to be a challenge that you take on if you feel equipped to do it. And yeah, I'm quite excited for us finally to have some endgame PvE challenge in the Division 2. They did not go in and play Escalations during this stream. Of course, we will be able to on Friday, but I can't show you any gameplay from that for now. What I can show you, however, is the new reward type that they are adding in relation to the Escalation mode, and that is Prototype Gear. This is an all-new gear quality that will apply to any high-end gear set or named item that we have in the Division 2. And if you played the Division 1 and you ever farmed any classified gear sets, this is somewhat similar to the idea from that system, but in my opinion, done exceptionally better. I was a big classified hater, but I'm very excited for prototype gear, and that's because, again, it is not excluding certain categories of gear, except exotics, which we'll talk about later. But you could get a Fenris glove prototype item, right? High ends are not going to be excluded. Every single item type that is eligible for prototype will be on an even playing field. Here's how it works, right? Prototype items can have higher base stats. The maximum is 1.5 times the current maximum of our core attributes and our attributes. So if you're used to having a 15% weapon damage roll be maxed out on a standard piece, that can now go up to 22.5%. Prototype gear also has augments. These are similar to, but do not replace talents. They also apply to every gear slot, so you can now have an augment or kind of a mini talent on your holster, your gloves. Augments are typically passive abilities that will layer atop your build. You can also level up their power, much the same as we do with like active modifiers. You can see that there's a progress bar, and you can stack these augment abilities across your different gear slots. If you really like what the description of one of them says, you could run that 3 times on your different gear pieces and you will stack up its power and bonus. Because of all of this, we are getting a new tinkering station tab called the Proto Lab, and in here you can do 2 things. For one, you can either pay a new currency to recalibrate what augment you've received on your prototype item. This will cost a lot over time to my understanding, but at least you have the option to do that. And then additionally, in the Proto Lab, you can pay to upgrade an existing gear item that you have to prototype quality. In order to upgrade an item to prototype quality, it is not going to be an easy thing. The item that you want to upgrade must be at expertise level 30 and have all of its stat attributes be maxed out. So yeah, that is a big investment, but again, prototype gear is meant to be the pinnacle new gear quality in the Division 2. Keep in mind that this is not really going to be required for any content aside from Escalation. We already power creep so much of the game, so this is meant to be rare. It's meant to be a new aspirational thing that you chase. But back on the topic of upgrading, the team wanted to emphasize that upgrading a piece to prototype will always result in it being an upgrade, right? Because even the minimum stat rolls that you can get on a prototype piece are the previous maximum rolls on standard gear. So again, let's say you take an item that has 15% weapon damage applied on its red core attribute. If you upgrade it to prototype, let's say the very worst you could get is 15.1. Even though it's only a 0.1 increase, that is still a gain over what you had previously. Aside from just upgrading existing pieces though, you can go out and farm prototype gear, but Escalation, the new mode, is going to be the exclusive drop source for these items. And as you could probably guess, you will on average get better stat rolls as well as better drop chances the higher the Escalation tier that you're playing on. The final real caveat to note here, as I mentioned a moment ago, is that currently exotics are not included in the prototype system. Obviously, exotics can already be very strong on their own. So for now, these are not going to have prototype versions. It is just, as I said at the beginning, high-end gear, gear sets, and named items. Okay, so once again, prototype gear is a whole new layer that is going atop every gear type except exotics that we have in the Division 2's endgame. But just like any other season in the Division 2, we have a whole new batch of gear and weapons to look at. Firstly, that includes the Royal Works brand set. This is going to give you 5% weapon handling at the 1 piece, 32% magazine size at the 2 piece, and 15% crit damage at the 3. There will then be 2 named versions of this brand that includes the Bulldog backpack with perfect composure, and the Robin, which is a named chest piece offering you perfect gunslinger. They then briefly took a look at the core strength gear set. This looks quite interesting. You gain 10% weapon handling for the 2 piece, 5% damage, armor, and skill efficiency at the 3 piece. And for the 4 piece talent called Core Exercise, it basically boils down to each core attribute that you have on your build. Let's say you have a weapon damage roll. Well, you then receive 40% of the bonus from the other 2 cores. So you would receive 40% of whatever that roll converted to armor would be. And then for skills, they said that skill tiers will count as 15% skill efficiency. So whatever 40% of that is, you would get that as well. Very interesting concept. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crazy math to do on this one, but I'm curious to dive dive into it. They showed off the new back and forth weapon talent. I didn't get the exact values, but this deals with swapping to the weapon grants you rate of fire and weapon damage. But then when you swap away from the weapon back to your primary, let's say, you then get those same bonuses just at lower values. And there will of course be a perfect version of this talent on both an ACR rifle and an AUG SMG. As far as the exotics, we have 3 new ones to take a look at. That includes the Investor Exotic Mask. This one's pretty interesting. It comes with no mod slot. Instead, you're able to get 3 attributes instead of just 2. And then for the talent, depending on the color attributes that you have, so let's say you have 2 red with crit damage and crit chance and 1 blue for hazard protection, you then receive corresponding bonuses from the talent. That means that for every red, you get a certain amount of crit damage. For every yellow, you get a certain amount of skill efficiency. And then for blue, armor regen. And as you may have been able to guess, the entire rolls on this mask are random. Random core, random attributes. So, interesting. And it is cool that we finally have a reason to farm repeated copies of one exotic to get those different rolls. Then we got the Whiplash Exotic Pistol. This deals with having the weapon holstered will reload it and prime the item after a certain amount of time. When it is primed, you can then swap to it, and that will grant you 20% rate of fire and 50% weapon damage for a set amount of time. Similarly, we then have the Agitator Exotic AR, and this has a similar bonus, but a little bit different. When this thing is holstered, you generate 50% less threat when you shoot, but also while it is holstered, after 10 seconds it becomes primed. When primed and you redraw the weapon, you get 25% rate of fire and 30% weapon damage while also generating 100% more threat. So, kind of a similar situation like we had a few seasons ago with the Overdogs and the Shroud both basing themselves off a certain talent. The Whiplash and the Agitator are similar to one another, but they should work slightly different. Okay, well that is the majority of the new stuff. At the end of the stream, they covered just a few little miscellaneous topics. One little quality of life feature that didn't quite fit in anywhere else is that in your inventory, you will now have a show all option. So on a certain item, let's say a striker mask, if you click show all, that then shows you every copy of that kind of item that you have in your inventory or your stash so that you can quickly see if it's better or worse than ones that you already have. They talked about how while escalations are great to bring new challenge levels to the main missions of the game, difficulty and challenge is a topic that they want to revisit throughout the year. They want to look into how they can keep other pieces of content in the game relevant, especially with the power climb that we're going to see with prototype gear. They did say that everything covered on today's stream are the primary features of Year 8 Season 1, so we are not yet getting crossplay or the incursion or any of that stuff. But the one thing that was not covered today and will not be in the PTS are the new classified assignments that they confirmed back in the anniversary stream are coming with Season 1. These are going to be paid pieces of content, and they did say that we will learn more as we head into the full season reveal stream closer to launch. Okay, everybody, well I believe that does it. That is my full recap for the Year 8 Season 1 PTS dev stream. Wow, a ton of stuff. I personally am thrilled. This season speaks exactly to the type of player and content that I look for in this game. I haven't had much to grind in the Division 2 for years. Prototype answers that. I haven't had much challenge when it comes to PvE stuff in years. Escalation answers that. The only thing better would have been some PvP updates, but we know those are coming eventually. In the meantime, I think this is going to be an awesome way to sink some time finally back into the game. And yeah, at this point, I would love to get any and all thoughts you may have. What do you think about those 2 highlight new features with escalations and prototype gear? Or what do you think about some of the other stuff? Any of the new gear that we looked at, the new Black Tusk Retaliations, the Retaliation quality of life features? Let me know. I'll be very curious to hear all of your thoughts. That is going to do it for me today, though I'll be back on Friday with some PTS coverage. Hope to see you back for that. But until then, my friends, RogueGold. Ow.